Hello, this is the 5th talk, part 2, in a series of lectures on the central nervous system, the periphery nervous system, and the waters they live in. And we're going to continue looking at the ventricles, but in this part we're more going to be looking at the fluids flowing into the ventricles from outside. In the first part we were more looking at the fluid produced in the ventricles, and now we're looking at the fluid coming to it. Okay. So again, here we have the central nervous system, the cerebrum, lower brain, spinal cord, cranial fluid around the outside, and ventricles of cranial fluid inside, down through the brain stem, down inside the whole length of the spinal cord. And here we have that again within more the lower part of the cranium, the lateral ventricles, the 3rd ventricle, the 4th ventricle, and down the spine. And here we have them in their entirety from the front, the lateral ventricles, the 3rd ventricle, the 4th ventricle, continuing on down the spinal cord, and from the side, the face is here, cerebellum here, lateral ventricles, 3rd ventricle, 4th ventricle, and down the whole spine. Again, very particular quality when you just see it as the ventricles on their own in their entirety. So, the ventricles are full of water, 99% water, has glucose, oxygen and minerals in it, and is produced within the ventricles at the corruplexes. Now, the ventricles have a lining. The whole skin of the ventricles, around the lateral ventricles, around the ducts going from the lateral ventricle to the 3rd ventricle, around the 3rd ventricle, around the whole 4th ventricle, and down, lining the ventricle down through the whole spinal cord has a lining. And this is made up of ependymal cells. And these ependymal cells are completely pervious. Water, glucose, oxygen, carbon dioxide, toxins can just flow in and out. They're cuboidal ependymal cells, they're cubes, and joining the different waters and what's in solution can just flow between these cells. So there's access in and out of these ventricles. It's pervious from the skin around it, just lets it in and out. And here is a picture of the ependymal cells. They're called cuboidal ependymal cells because they're cubes, fit together in patterns of squares. And these larger blue dots, these are the nucleus. And then they have gaps between them. This is a sheet and this is from the side, and these surround the whole of the ventricles. The lateral ventricles, the 3rd ventricle in the middle, down through the fourth ventricle, down the spinal cord. This surrounds the water. And this is also the makeup of the corruplexes. The corruplexes is completely continuous with this lining and made of the same cells of this lining. But as it comes into the corruplexes, these cells modify, and what they gain are these little blue dots, these little connectors. Now those aren't there in the whole lining, the whole suit, the skin of the ventricles or the water within the ventricles, but then as this becomes the corruplexes, they come much closer together and they get these little blue connectors holding them together, and they make a tight junction, the same as in the second talk where we looked at the capillaries and their lining and how they filter all of the water for the central nervous system. And they also have these little blue dots making the gauge for the filter. The water, only water can come through there. It makes a filter that only water can come through, and then water, glucose, minerals, oxygen comes through the cells. So this was in talk 2. And this produces the whole water for the whole body of the central nervous system through 400 miles of capillaries. So as these cells come into the corruplexes, they come together and get these tight junctions exactly the same as this, and they make the same type of filter, only water can come through those gaps. And then the glucose, the oxygen, the minerals come through the cells. So it's the same gauge filter as is around the capillaries of the central nervous system that are producing the waters for the whole central nervous system. The corruplexes is the same type of filter. But on the whole skin of the ventricles, it's the other way round. The close connectors aren't there, the cells spread out, nice gaps between them, water, oxygen, glucose, toxins, carbon dioxide, anything just flow straight in and out. They're completely pervious. So it goes from one side to the other. So the big blue dots, they're the nucleuses, and then the small blue dots where they're joining, these are the connectors which make the tight junctions in the corruplexes. Great. So, as we saw in the last talk, this is the ventricles are wrapped around and within the lower brain, around the brain stem, down through the whole spine, and it's kind of got a bit of a darker energy than the energy around in the cerebrum, in the waters of the cerebrum. Now, all of this water is travelling south or down. There's an excess. Once the cranial fluid is used, it starts migrating down through the central nervous system, finally making its way out through the nerves, then out into the lymph, and then back to the heart. So not only does the ventricles produce its own water, but also above it we have the cerebrum, this large organ. It's 5 or 6 times the size of the lower brain. So there's quite a lot of waters migrating down. Some will come around and down. Some will travel through the body, maybe into the thalamus itself and down through the body of the thalamus. But the lateral ventricles are perfectly placed for the water migrating down and out to be received into and then travel down through the ventricles, down through the spinal cord, in the ventricle, in the spinal cord and out. So it's a well down the middle that not only produces its own well water, it's going to also receive it from the cerebrum above it as the waters come down. The cranial fluid is acted upon by gravity. It's heavier than any other fluids in the body. So we've got this slightly darker energy, grounded energy of the well of these ventricles. But then also there's this brighter light, this brighter energy and fluid coming in through the lateral ventricles and then in to the third ventricle, and down into the fourth ventricle and down the spine. So it produces the well produces its own water with oxygen, glucose and minerals, and then it also receives water from the cerebrum. So here we have the ventricles in the brain stem and backing onto the cerebellum, and here we have this large organ. So it's there, it's also three-dimensional, it's coming around here, and it works out it's 5 or 6 times the size of that. So there's a lot of water. Once the cranial fluid has been used, once the oxygen and glucose have turned into carbon dioxide and toxins are coming out from the cells, some of that is taken back by the lymph, some of that is taken back by the venous blood, but a proportion of it isn't. The venous blood can't take it all back, so a proportion is travelling off as a form of lymph in a way, and some of this can travel out and down, and some of it can travel in, and it can come in to these lateral ventricles, and then with the rest of the cranial fluid, an inner journey, an outer journey, it can travel out and down, and then there's an inner journey, it can travel in and down. So there's both. Not only is the fluid in the ventricles the same, or the same when they start as the fluid in the body of the central nervous system, it's actually the same fluid because the fluid is flowing in from around. So here we have the lateral ventricles. So they're around the thalamus. There's this surplus water migrating from the cerebrum, and it can spread out around the whole cerebrum. It goes over the tentorium, down around the brain stem, down around the spinal cord, so it can go out. There's an outer journey. It also can go in. And all of the sections of the brain, or the cerebrum, they connect to these two ventricles, so it can travel in. The lining, these are caves, they're just holes, big caves full of water, underground water. And the lining, the ependymal cells, are fully pervious. They will let this water just drain through them. So the water will flow in to these caves. They will also be producing their own fluid from the corruplexes, and this together will flow into the third ventricle, then down into the fourth ventricle and away. And in the 6th lecture we are going to talk much more about the corruplexes in detail, how it works and how it works as not only producing fluid but how it works as a filter to filter out carbon dioxide, filter out toxins. So as this migrating fluid from the cerebrum comes into these ventricles, drains inwardly into these ventricles, fully pervious skin, it has toxins in it. It has carbon dioxide in it. And not only is the corruplexes producing water, it filters out the carbon dioxide, the toxins that are arriving from the cerebrum. And this has a much brighter energy. So this is also being received, the lateral ventricles, even though they're of the brain stem and the lower brain and the thalamus, which has a bit darker energy. The thalamus is quite high in the scheme of things, so it's a bit brighter anyway. But there's a brightness shining in, as well as it's like the sun shining on the earth. So there's the groundedness, the earthness, the gravity, but here we have the sun shining on it, and it's these lateral ventricles can have this brighter energy, as well as the deep, dark energy of the lower brain. They have this light shining in it from the cerebrum, and it comes in all into the third ventricle and down. So the ventricles carry that as well. Also we have, you see what we have is all of this fluid, this extra, we have the fluid within the ventricles with nutriments in it and oxygen in it. We also have fluid coming down from the whole central nervous system as a lymph, as a migrating fluid making its way out, so it's both. And this is being used. This travels off down the nerves as kind of cranial lymph, but also food for the nerves that's coming from here, being produced here. So the cerebrum doesn't have any nerves, so it's all migrating, it's all leaving. It's all coming down into here and down. The cerebellum also doesn't have any nerves, so there's fluids migrating out of the cerebellum, out from the sides, and also directly the whole root comes in to the fourth ventricle, and it drains inwardly, so it expands out and down and around, but it also drains and migrates inwardly and comes into the fourth ventricle and travels down inside the spine. The body, the brain stem, this has nerves coming out of it, and they all back up the stems of these nerves, the base of these nerves. They all come in and nestle around the fourth ventricle, where they are receiving nutriments for their journey off. And the spinal cord has all the spinal nerves coming out from it, coming into it, which are taking the fluids away, and they all travel right into the center where this central ventricle is in the spine. So they're taking away. So the cerebrum, or the two lobes, two hemispheres of the cerebrum, they are creating a fluid that's migrating, because there's no nerves to lick it away, to whatever that's called, wick, to wick it away. So it's just a migrating. What can't be taken by the venous blood is migrating out in all directions. And some will take an outer journey to the outside and outside the spinal cord, and some will take an inner journey into the ventricles and down the center. So we have these two brains in a way. For me, these are brains. You've got the cerebellum, they're kind of like a brain here, and then the cerebrum like a brain here. For me, not for everybody, for me. And then the brain stem, it's two things. It's like an extension of the spinal cord, kind of becoming the central nervous system in the cranium, kind of just like an extension, and then communicating out through this. But the cerebrum and the cerebellum and the cerebrum, for me they're kind of more brain-like. They've both got two hemispheres. They both connect into the brain stem. There's the two hemispheres of the cerebrum connecting into the two lateral ventricles and into the two hemispheres of the thalamus. And then there's the two hemispheres of the cerebrum, which are also connecting centrally into this central cord, into this stem, and then the spinal cord. And they breathe. There's a fluid migrating out of them, and they also breathe. It all breathes. So, and that may, not everybody sees it and feels it as I do, but I'm viewing it through the medium of holographic breathing. So for me, this is all breathing. Cerebrum, it's breathing. Cerebellum, breathing. Coming into the center, into the brain stem, breathing. And the ventricles, breathing, traveling down the spine, breathing, 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 breathing. And out through the cells, breathing. So my mode of viewing is breathing. So if someone's just watching the energies, it might have different qualities, but there are the higher energies in the breath. But also the movement of the breath is a physical thing. It's connected to the earth. And we think of the lungs as breathing, but every cell breathes, not the same as the lungs. The lungs can open in all directions because it's got an outside access that can allow it to fill up. But the cells, they will expand in one way and shorten another, but they breathe. And we teach this later on, how all the cells breathe. There's a cellular breath, and this is the same for the cerebrum. There's a cellular breath through the cerebellum. There's a cellular breath through the brainstem, through the spinal cord, through the nerves. Everything breathes, and that's my viewpoint, is the breath moving through it. So it breathes. And you've got this extra migrating fluid that's been breathed and eaten and is travelling in the water. Some of it can travel around and down from the cerebrum, from the cerebellum around, and then down around the outside of the spinal cord. Some of it can travel inwardly into the lateral ventricles, or from the cerebrum into the lateral ventricles, into the third ventricle, down the fourth ventricle, down the spinal cord, and the cerebellum breathing, and also a migrating fluid can come out around it and down the spinal cord, can also travel inwardly into the fourth ventricle and down the spinal cord. And where it's mainly travelling in, the root of it comes just above the corruplexes here. So as it's coming in to the fourth ventricle here, we have this lower corruplexes which will filter out of it all of the toxins and carbon dioxide. So this all stays pure, even though it's got all of this migrated fluid taking this inner journey down the middle. At every stage it's being filtered, it's producing oxygen, glucose and water. It's also filtering out carbon dioxide, toxins and water. So it's maintaining its status quo on its inner journey inwardly. And all of these have different energies. The cerebrum has a particular energy. Again, the cerebellum is much darker, deeper energy, and it doesn't house the intellect, but it's like a lower brain. Then the brain stem connecting it all together and becoming the spinal cord. It breathes off through the nerves. So we're going to have to stop before the battery goes again. So just breathing. It's all taking, we're looking at the inner journey. It's all breathing. Cerebellum, cerebrum, all coming down into the ventricles, down the spinal cord, out through the nerves. We're looking at the inner journey, out through the nerves, into the lymph and back to the heart. Okay, so we've reached our time limit. So thank you, and we're going to look much more at that journey, but with the corruplexes, how the corruplexes works in talk 6. Thank you.